The newest national park is just a short drive away from Pittsburgh. Visit Adventures on the Gorge, located adjacent to the new River Gorge National Park. Experience a whitewater rafting adventure where kids raft free. Or head out on one of our zipline courses where you'll have a high-flying adventure to remember. With lodging options available for every comfort level, you'll find your home away from home in the new River Gorge. Visit AdventuresOnTheGorge.com to plan your vacation today.
Chief of Politicus USA with co-owner and managing editor Jason Easley. We are going to discuss the incredible overreach of the United States Supreme Court today in its final decisions of the October 2021 court and President Biden's announcement that he supports the filibuster carve-out, not only just for Roe, but for the 14th Amendment, which includes a lot of vital civil rights, including same-sex marriage and birth control. So, Jason, let's start off with you. Tell us what's happening.
Well, in a nutshell, the Supreme Court has way overreached, and I expect there's going to have to be some pushback from the legislative branch. I believe that, this is a constitutional system of checks and balances. The Supreme Court has gone too far. The ruling today where they tried to limit congressional administrative authority is the step beyond the other steps beyond. I can't say there's just one. There's been so many. But that would severely, everyone was talking about climate policy, but that would actually, their ruling today would actually influence every bit of administrative rulemaking, and that means that the legislative and executive branches, the legislative branch will have to respond by clearly designating powers and authorities, and the executive branch, as it currently stands, would not be able to actually interpret the law to enforce it effectively.
Yeah, it seems like the Supreme Court, I've been saying this for a few weeks, but today was, wow, did they just put a crown on their own heads? And you're talking about the West Virginia versus the EPA ruling today. So that's Kagan. Let's read her dissent really quickly, just a segment of it, because I think she succinctly explained. She said, whatever else this court may know about, it does not have a clue about how to address climate change. The court appoints itself, instead of Congress or the expert agency, the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court, what she's getting at there is the Supreme Court is actually taking over the policy-making role of Congress. And, Republicans have said for decades they're afraid of activist judges, so what did they do? They filled the Supreme Court with activist judges.
Yeah, and it seems like they're going beyond legislating from the bench, and they're overriding the other branches of government.
Yeah.
So it's not just what they used to say was so horrible, legislating from the bench, but now, I mean, they're going back and gutting precedents. They're basically taking on the 14th Amendment, which they did in the overturn of Roe, which implicates a number of other civil rights that hinge upon the 14th Amendment. And it's really, I'm not even sure, I keep saying this court is not legitimate, and it's very disturbing after what happened today, that the second ruling, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, the second ruling, which looked like it might be a small win for the Biden administration, but I want to clarify too, to me this isn't about which side, quote-unquote, won. We're talking about the balance and how the Supreme Court is supposed to work in our government. It has nothing to do with who is in office right now, except that it has everything to do with that when it comes to how they decide things. Even this decision that they are going to let Biden, in the Texas ruling, let the Biden administration sort of maybe win there, it's actually being sent back to a Trump judge, and this keeps happening on these immigration and border patrol issues, where they're forcing the Biden administration to continue implementing Trump administration policies on the border that the Biden administration, and frankly anyone who cares about human rights, is obviously not supportive of. So they're now forcing, they're making the executive branch use the former president's policies by kicking everything down to these Trump courts on in these border areas.
Yeah, I mean, the situation basically is we have one branch of government that has appointed and anointed itself
Right.
with powers, and the constitutional remedy for that is the legislative branch has to check the Supreme Court. And there's a few different ways they could do that. Like I said, the most explicit one is the Supreme Court has really relied on this idea of strict authority given and defined authority given in legislation for whether or not something could be done. They used it a bunch of times this last year. So what I expect is you're going to see the way bills are written to change a little bit, and you're going to see Congress start designating explicit authority to do things. Which means that if the Supreme Court wants explicit authority, well, then Congress is going to lay out point by point, piece by piece. Remember with the Affordable Care Act, one reason the Supreme Court couldn't overturn it was because they found that the Congress had designated explicit authority to implement the law.
Yeah.
So it's been this way for a very long time, where Congress could basically just imply the authority to implement. But now they're going to have to get specific. And if I was a member of Congress or leadership, I would be loading up with explicit authority instructions all through legislation, paragraphs and pages, so there's no room for the Supreme Court to overturn anything on this crutch of explicit authority. They're saying there's no more inherent authority to interpret and enforce the law.
Right, and this applies all across the government. I mean, so are they going to have to, is Congress going to have to go back and rewrite every law that can be interpreted this way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how that majority opinion was written, if it was just limited to this EPA decision, but like the issue of climate change is such a hot button issue right now on the table as far as how to deal with it. The thing I can see happening is I can see Congress the next time they do a climate change bill, which by the way might be as soon as next month with the way the Build Back Better revival is going. I can see them putting in tons of explicit authority, so that there's no way the court could say that they don't have the authority. The EPA does not have the authority to do this, because the court is basically saying now, unless Congress gives the executive branch the authority to do something, they don't have the authority to do it.
Yeah, major questions doctrine.
Yeah.
So the Congress needs to answer before an agency can make regulations, but that claim can be made constantly. So it's like a troll sitting there and asking you constantly everything you do.
Oh, yeah, it's a universal they could use to literally overturn anything they wanted to overturn regulatorily. Yeah, I think that there's other ways, like we talked about this, and this is just in theoretical, but everyone's talking about expanding the court, adding to the court. I would wonder if it's feasible for them to actually use the Texas decision where they let the Texas law stand, where it said that this law cannot be challenged in court or sued over. I'm wondering if at some point the federal government is not going to take that decision and start writing legislation that basically says the Supreme Court courts cannot challenge or rule on this decision. And if they really wanted to get all poison pill with it, they could basically try to say, okay, if the court hears this, then every seat in the court will be deemed vacant, and the president will have to nominate new justices. Now, constitutionally, people will be like, well, I don't know if that's constitutional, but if the Supreme Court, what if, let's say, for example, that this happens, Biden goes ahead and nominates 9 new justices. The Senate, if the Senate confirms them, what really can the Supreme Court do?
Well, I think,
constitutionally speaking, what really can they do? The nominees have been, the legislation was changed, Biden made the nominations were confirmed.
but that all hinges on Democrats going along with that. It would just...
Well, I'm not saying this right now. I'm saying that we're heading in that direction.
Right.
We're heading, if this keeps going in this extreme direction, eventually push is going to come to shove. And you can go back, since the constitutional adoption and this inherent push-pull between the branches of government.
Right.
Well, the Supreme Court's really pulling hard right now on the legislative branch. And at some point, whether it's under a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress, this belief, this inherent turf war is universal. It goes beyond party. So eventually, if this court is going to uphold the same mentality about strict constructionalism, they're going to start knocking down Republican things next time Republicans have power.
But see, I don't think that what this looks to me, it's so ideologically driven. They're parsing things and cherry picking like they did in the Dobbs decision, so that there's no precedent that's going to be upheld. They're just picking what works to impose this really radical ideological decision making on the country.
I think structurally,
I mean, how can they do that and they continue to get away with it? I mean, you're saying, well, eventually this would start to impact Republicans. I'm just concerned that they're so ideologically driven, which they've already demonstrated by the way what they claim they're basing these decisions on is very suspect.
Yeah, these decisions are fundamentally unsound.
Yeah.
They're bad structural decisions. They're not good based in logical, legal reasoning. They're not good guidance.
That's the concern that keeps bothering me. As much as, of course, these individual decisions I don't agree with and don't like, but I feel like we're getting the way they base these decisions on cherry picking and leaving out segments of what they claim they're basing something on in order to justify what they're doing. We're basically at a point of lawlessness. There's no, like, without justice, there's no law. The law is supposed to work towards justice. We know it's not perfect, but that's supposed to be the goal. Well, you can't have law when justice isn't the goal, and their goal isn't justice. Their goal is to create the society that they, have envisioned for themselves in this very far right.
It's a far right limiting of government.
But it isn't limiting government.
It's a far right.
That's what they claim. And yet, okay, let's just go back to one of the things that has happened repeatedly, and this goes across both parties, I think, is there's such an elitism about being on this court, and then the justice is being funneled in from elite universities, where then everyone praises when someone gets nominated. We hear all this praise. So this happened with Gorsuch. People had concerns that he had a climate agenda, and guess what? His mother ran the EPA under Reagan. She destroyed it, literally, just gutted it. And under the guise of small government, she cost the taxpayer $17.6 million in 1981 dollars, just in having to pay the people for severance pay that she fired.
Yeah, I think the concept of small government, what they are viewing as small government is they're inherently taking away governmental authority.
Yes,
is what's happening. That's
right.
what I mean by small government. Is you look at the gun decision in New York. That was the taking away of the state's ability to permit concealed firearms.
Okay, that doesn't read to me like small government.
You look at what they did with Roe. They took away the state's authority to make its own abortion law and be pro-choice. Basically.
Well, they took it away only if you're. I mean, they gave states more power with Roe.
Yeah.
In the Dobbs decision, and they gave them no power in the gun decision.
Yeah, and it's a very inconsistent.
That's what I'm saying. There's no consistency.
There's an overall arching conservative, very, very, very conservative, strict narrow interpretation here. That unless the Constitution specifically says, they've used this rationale for everything.
Yeah.
They use it in the gun decision. They use it in Roe. They use it in today's decisions. And so that means that unless the law or the Constitution specifically says, which the Alito Roe decision is just a travesty, it's not written based on anything other than some man's ideological beliefs.
Well, that thing actually read to me as if, and I know Alito wrote it, but it read to me as if Justice Thomas's what a clerk reports that he said years ago, that he was going to use his time to punish liberals and make them miserable the way they had made him miserable, it actually read to me like that was the agenda, to hurt women. Because it was so unsound, and it was based on, I mean, literally they went through and just picked things and left the sentence after it out, where it completely negated what they claimed it said.
Yeah, and the big thing is with all these decisions, the common thread is they are literally taking a hatchet to the idea of the government providing liberty or
Right.
freedom in any way.
And I think that's the thing I wanted to get to when you looked at what they did with Dobbs, that was basically an attack on the 14th Amendment, and Thomas mentioned several other cases, notably not the one that would impact himself, but he noted other cases. Why? Because the 14th Amendment includes a lot of vital civil rights, including same-sex marriage and birth control access. So what does the 14th Amendment, it was originally passed in 1868, and it expanded due process rights of previously enslaved Americans. And I wanted to mention that part because they're basically undoing that.
Yeah. They're basically undoing any expansion of rights past 1860.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the problem is with this whole mentality is society is so much different, and everyone has to remember that this court isn't going to stay a 6-3 court forever. It's probably going to have a vacancy again in the next year or two. Who knows? Maybe even 2 vacancies. You can never tell.
My goodness, if there's a vacancy in 2 years, Mr. Easley, we won't be able to fill it because Mitch McConnell says you can't do that when you're, a year away from an election.
Well, that brings me back to the biggest point of all. Republicans voted in 2016 not because they loved Donald Trump, but because they saw the ability to remake the Supreme Court. You talk to Republicans back then, they would tell you this is all about the Supreme Court, this is all about the Supreme Court, this is all about the Supreme Court. They didn't really, deep down at heart, I mean, Trump was just their vehicle to get where they wanted to go.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you're talking about. You're talking about the elitist Republicans that knew that, but the base doesn't know that stuff. They're just being manipulated by the populist,
Well, I mean, this was in Fox News coverage. They were always hammering home the Supreme Court and how vital the Supreme Court was in the election. Democrats need to understand, Democrats have had this sort of mentality that as long as they have the presidency, no matter what happens, everything will be okay. Because, and remember under Obama, it was always, well, we have Obama, and no matter what goes on, he'll make it all right. Well, we're finding out now that a lot of stuff can happen that a president can't make all right.
I think that goes back to, and it's very true, Democrats don't vote in midterms. They don't vote in smaller elections the same way that Republicans do. Republicans are a smaller party, but they more reliably show up at the polls, and Democrats need to change that. It's sort of like all these rights that I don't want to say we took for granted. I certainly don't feel like I ever took Roe for granted. I've been fighting on behalf of abortion access for women since I was in the university, so it's not like I always saw that they wanted to take that away. But I think that we need to, as a push for the way we talk about this, and I'm talking about everyone, I'm talking about as you talking about Fox News, well, where's the liberal media constantly hammering? Instead of, we don't like what so-and-so did on X, which is important to talk about, but don't demoralize people to the point where they don't even show up to vote. It's not about that person, and that's something we have to get over. It is not about Barack Obama, and he always said that. It's not about that person. It's about all the things, the ideas, and the values that you support.
Another big problem mentality is this liberals, the left, Democrats are all stuck in this zero-sum political thinking. If they don't win, if they don't get everything, there's no point in doing anything. If they can't get something passed right now, then it's a failure. They don't see the long-term advancement in moving the ball down the field. I mean, Obamacare didn't happen out of the blue because Barack Obama and Democrats won Congress. it took decades to get from hard work by a lot of people to get in position to make the ACA happen. I mean, one cannot simply sit there and think about things just as zero sum. Well, like when Nancy Pelosi proposed her path on Roe, how many people did you hear from that were like, well, this is never going to happen. Well, they can't get rid of the filibuster. This is never going to happen.
Right. It's always immediately what we can't have this, so therefore. I mean, I don't want to. I do want to make a distinction. Let's not. This isn't about attacking Democrats. It's not about attacking progressives and liberals. This is about how can this movement see what's happening right now and be better? Because
thinking about things differently.
Yes, the right has been fighting to overturn Roe since it got established in the first place. They have been doing this on every level. They have been putting people in government in their local little cities and towns to prime them to get power one day, 20 years later, to do what's happening right now. And that's the part that I think this is an opportunity for people on, I don't even know. You don't want to say the left, but it's not really the left. It's the middle
really,
too. Like
it's the middle, it's the left, it's everybody beyond the far right. It's not the far right.
Yeah, and there are included people. There are people, even in the Republicans, why they're there, I don't know, but there are people in that party who aren't crazy. So everyone needs to come together and start looking at things differently and fighting this from the ground up on every level, but like an all-out assault. That's what they do so well on the right. Everything is a war.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino online.
I was only playing for fun, so winning was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's favorite free online social casino. You too could have the chance to win life-changing cash prizes. Absolutely anybody could be like Mary. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and play for free now. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice of the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of the winner.
Make your garden twice as big this summer and get twice the harvest. Right now, get 2 Bonnie Plants 2.32 quart vegetable and herb plants for only $10. Their ready-to-grow starter plants make growing vegetables and herbs at home easier than ever before. Make your garden twice as big this summer and enjoy homegrown fresh vegetables and herbs with Bonnie Plants, 2 for just $10. Feels like 4th of July savings at the Home Depot. How doers get more done. Selection varies by store, in-store only, not available offshore or Alaska.
And I think part of the mentality is that, at least for liberals and progressives, there is a peace mentality, a mentality to find consensus. You know, that's a democratic thing too, is we want to get along with other people. But the other side is always at war with our ideas. And so we're seeing the disparity of that right now. And it's going to be difficult. How do you hold on to your ideological belief that diplomacy is the best soft power there is, while waging war on people who are trying to destroy your rights? If you hear there's something in the background, that's our dog, our Politicus puppy, chewing his yak cheese.
He's chewing his bone.
He's making a lot of noise because he wants to be heard by everybody. And you have been heard, sir. Okay.
I think that it takes a lot more thought and planning and foresight and being satisfied with, if you gain an inch, that's an inch you didn't have before. And then when you're pushing forward, like you said, in a fight, in a war, and whatever, there seems to be some mentality among some people that they want to blitzkrieg and get everything they've ever wanted right now. They want to just, think they're going to roll through, make it all happen. But yeah, these are now, especially with Roe, this is going to take some time to really fundamentally make a lasting change. Sure, Democrats could codify it, and they could make it the law of the land again, but that's just a law. What happens if they lose power someday and a Republican president Congress, a Republican Congress passes a repeal of that law, along with the national abortion ban, and a Republican president signs it?
Wait, I mean, part of what you're talking about is what's going to happen. Because we don't want to rely on these things because how many people are going to die in the interim? That's
Yeah,
the problem.
yeah,
But
I
the
mean,
pendulum swings when the public sees. Because there's a lot of people. I get tired of these polls. Oh, Roe isn't going to sway anyone. Don't tell me that until now that Roe has been overturned. You better believe it's going to be swaying.
And you're
people.
seeing a big difference in the polling all of a sudden.
Yeah, all of a sudden already, and that's not even people realizing how it impacts their lives, including men. This is going to impact everyone's lives, and people are starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, I do actually support, because my plan has always been, this. First of all, this isn't even about whether you support abortion. No one has asked you that. The question is, do you support the right for individuals in this country to get the medical care they need that their doctor thinks is best for them? End of the story. I'm not, as a woman, I don't feel that I owe anybody an explanation about what goes on between me and my doctor. And I think that overreach is pretty disgusting. And I think it's going to, with these huge decisions, I mean, if they try to take away contraception, I mean, the public is going to respond. They've had these rights for a long time. You and I have talked about this with the ACA. It's much harder to take away rights that people have already had than it is to. It's really difficult to pass these things. But once they're passed, when Republicans kept saying they were going to repeal and replace, and they never did have an idea that they could even offer up, And you would always say it's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, society eventually, and this did happen with the Affordable Care Act, society will say no.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen to this court. And it's happening already, and that's why their standing has dropped to 26% trust. Society is saying no. And that's how real change comes about. It's the legislation, the codifying, the legal things that we have in our system, those all come about when enough people in this country come together and say no. They do it through protest at first, they do it through voting movements, and then eventually they do it through voting and influence. And that's what the Supreme Court is unleashing here. They seem like children who are just let loose in the candy store, and they're making all their right-wing dreams come true.
They do. I mean, it's very reactionary, which has always been a concern of mine. I mean, as I've always kept my ideology separate from the way I like to see the law implemented. The law should be implemented really carefully and under great consideration and kind of with great moderation. That's how I've always seen it. So I look at what these people are doing on the Supreme Court. It's actually impossible to respect the Supreme Court, and I personally don't think that it is helping itself to be seen as a legitimate court, because it's inviting people to say, I think you guys are so out of control, we're going to have to find a way to ignore or negate or override you.
Yeah, and that's exactly, as a society, that's what's going to happen. And that, we have to look at the societal influence and big things like Roe. Like, there's many different kinds of Supreme Court decisions. Some of them are, like the EPA decision, that was procedural. They used a procedural crutch there, and that can be pretty easily fixed by Congress if it wants to. It can just explicitly say what the EPA can do and comply with the court. There's a different kind of decision that fundamentally changes rights in the society, and that's Roe. And that's a thing. Everyone thinks, oh no, this court's awful, none of this stuff can be done. Like, even with the New York concealed carry decision, they could actually change their concealed carry law in New York to comply with the language the court used, and it wouldn't be challengeable again on those grounds. But that's kind of procedural. The ideological, societal, I'm taking away your rights.
Right. That's really where
where society comes together and just goes, no.
Let's look at prohibition and see how that worked out for people. Because there was a time that there was a group of people, like a large group of people that thought, yeah, we want prohibition, we want this. Then it was enacted. It didn't go over very well. No. I mean, ultimately, in the end, people were like, I don't really care. We found a compromise on it, and I don't really care. It is no longer this ideological thing. It's no longer a source of contention. People will argue about the policy. Who's going to get the say in this? Will it be the liquor manufacturers, or is it going to be the state? Whatever. There's all these decisions. He's going crazy on the theatrics. But But ultimately, the public decided they weren't really interested in making alcohol illegal.
And that's what happens, and eventually that trickles up, and people like the Supreme Court and the Republican Party, their biggest hope is that that the country will just sit here and take this.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
And accept it.
Yeah.
And this is the new normal, and this is life. And because that's the only way these kind of repressions work, are successful.
I mean, I will say, as much as I agree with everything you've been saying about the long term and about how people need to be focused on that. But I do have to say that there is, and I'm one of them, there are many people, unfortunately a lot of experts, who are concerned about the state of our democracy and will it really be functional 5 years from now. And I think that question is looming large over all of this because there's a lot of fear. And I certainly don't want to jack that fear up, but on the other hand, I think we would be remiss if we pretended that wasn't this dark cloud hanging over everything, because if Democrats don't win the midterm, and even if they do, and some of these Republican secretaries of states, and in our state here in Pennsylvania, Republican gubernatorial candidates who can appoint the Secretary of State, get into office, those elections are not going to be counted in a democratic way. And I do think that has to be addressed. We have to say that is out there.
Yeah, I mean, people, they shouldn't get discouraged. They shouldn't feel hopeless. They shouldn't think this is going to change for years, because there's something they can do right now. I mean, if you live in one of these states, like our state here, Pennsylvania, you can vote, you can win. I mean, if Josh Shapiro wins the gubernatorial election, which, by the way, everyone's talking about John Fetterman all across the country, everywhere, because that has national implications. But if Josh Shapiro, the Democratic candidate, wins the gubernatorial election here, abortion's going to be safe.
Yes, but
our elections will be safe.
Right, but if Doug Mastriano wins,
but he won't.
Well, he might be.
We all know. I mean,
he might be indicted.
Yeah, we know. We all know. I mean, I know the national media is trying to make something out of Doug Mastriano, but as I tried to explain to people, we've all known about QAnon Doug for a few years now, because he ran in 2020. He ran in 2018.
I understand it, but I do think that the way that he's run, I mean, this is the concern, right? You have people running he sent buses to January 6th, to the insurrection. There are reports, and I believe photos, and maybe possibly video of him crossing the police barrier.
Yeah, he breached the Capitol.
Okay, he breached the Capitol. He's running to be the governor. There are people, Republicans, running for office all over this country who engaged in some level on this attack on the United States. That is really stunning, and I don't think it's discussed enough, because what does that say about the state of the Republican?
That's
Are
exactly
they
it.
a legitimate party, or is this kind of a political organization that uses intimidation, fear, violence to get its way?
It is coming close to being having tendencies of a domestic terror cell.
I mean, I don't think that overstates it. The attack on the Capitol was a domestic terrorist attack. They planned this attack. Many of them supported it. We have not seen from Republican leadership, and let's not forget that Donald Trump is still the leader of the Republican Party as of today. No one has renounced this except for a very few Republicans, two of whom are on the January 6th committee. And Liz Cheney set to lose her seat because she puts her patriotism to this country over her party. It looks like they are actively embracing crime as a way to get what they want.
Trump has remade the party in his own image, and that's literally, if you look at his personal dynamics, his tendencies and his values, of selfishness, of criminality.
Mafia. It's the mafia mentality that he's brought to the party.
That's what they've become.
I mean, let's not forget, though, did they even, after Nixon, did they rebuild themselves from, gee, it might not be good to attack our opponent, to spy on them, to use the levers of government against our political opponents? They let Trump do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some deep-seated things there that have been there for a very, very long time.
This is not new. It didn't just happen under Trump, although he did, as you pointed out. He is kind of like the final fungus on the top of this whole thing, because he brought his personality disorder, his kind of absolute sociopathic lack of care for anyone, including his own vice president. He brought that to the party and really elevated that.
Well, I view it as like he saw the worst elements of the party as his way to intimidate and maintain others within his party.
Yes.
Maintain power and control first within the party, and then once he has power and control within the party, he was able to, with the help of Vladimir Putin, win an election, and then he tried to exert that same power and control over the country. Mm-hmm. And so his whole mentality is, his whole operational structure is to scare people, scare Republicans within the party, scare everybody. It's a fascist regime within that party.
I mean, look at it. Exactly, that's exactly what it is, and maybe soft authoritarianism, but it is authoritarianism. And look at right now what the January 6th committee left us with during their surprise hearing. At the close of that, after we find out about really horrifying things that Donald Trump, wanted his enraged, quote, supporters. I think it's more like a cult, but these people who were at his, quote, rally, he wanted to take down the MAG so that people with weapons could come in and then they could march to the Capitol afterwards, and he wanted to be there when they did that. Now, he seems to know that they weren't going to hurt him. He said that. I want to know who did he know they were going to hurt? If you know they weren't going to hurt you, you know who they were going to hurt. So I think that's a question that I would really like to have answered, or probably never will, but that remains large. But what happened at the end of that? They said they shared two examples of witness intimidation and witness tampering that seems to be coming from the lawyers that it's now been suggested that Trump has been raising money to pay for these lawyers for everyone who could have turned on him, right? And so what are those lawyers may be a part of this witness intimidation, and of course you see Cassidy Hutchinson did not decide to testify. She changed lawyers, and all of a sudden she's cooperating.
She had a lot more to say.
She had a lot more to say.
Which is a lot, because she was deposed for 8 hours across 4 interviews. So she said a lot before, but
when she changed lawyers, everything
came out.
Everything came out, and she has really opened the door in a way I don't think people appreciate. I was actually a little disappointed to see so many people, calling her a fascist. I think when you are not in power and you weren't a part of the planning of all of this, to be the only person willing to come in front in public and testify, it takes a lot of courage. I don't agree with her politics, and yeah, she worked for some of the most abhorrent people.
Ted
Cruz. That doesn't change. We need to stay on some level. We need to remind ourselves of our humanity, and to see, when we see patriotism, because it is so rare coming from somebody on the Republican side, it isn't that we're erasing all of the previous sins. It's that takes, especially for someone who's 25 years old, it takes a lot of courage. And we can't even imagine the pressure she and her family, no doubt, have been under. And I'm talking about threats. I mean, you know what we suspect the Trump government did to our business.
Yeah.
The intimidation, the abuse of power, putting us through 4 years of something really horrible that almost destroyed our business, due to just taking time away and resources and money to deal with it. So we know what he's capable of.
Yeah, and I disagree with anybody who says, well, Liz Cheney, she voted against whatever, voting rights or whatever. Who cares? This is what, again, this is zero-sum thinking. You have to agree with me on everything, or I can't trust you on anything. When it comes to things like the 1-6 committee, like democracy, there's only two teams. For democracy, against democracy.
Right, and I would say voting rights are part of that, and so understand it, of course. And people say, on every level I disagree with her, ideologically. But we are now really in the fight for this democracy, and it isn't who cares. I think you took that.
Well, it is who cares, because if you don't have a democracy anymore,
yeah.
Nobody has voting
rights.
rights.
Okay, but that's true.
It doesn't matter.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
The democracy is the foundation of everything. We can all go back to disagreeing on voting rights and policies and legislation.
And I agree with you on all of that, but I just think that it's important to state that people whose rights are being taken away right now feel very differently about this. And when you can't go to vote because there's 80 million hurdles put in front of you, and I spent a year, I know you know this, but the listeners might not, I spent a year registering predominantly black voters in rural Georgia. And I can tell you that the number of obstacles put in the way for people to exercise their just most basic freedom was horrifying. And to think that that was when those protections were established, and they have since been taken away. And so it's really difficult for me to be, I think it's hard to not react this way, to say this, when you said, who cares? It just kind of, I get your overall point, but what I'm just saying is, you've got to see people in the line of fire are going to have a different reaction. And I think we have to honor that and say, yes, that's absolutely correct. But we still need to look at this bigger picture.
But the people I see blasting Liz Cheney and says you vote against this or that aren't African Americans. They aren't.
That's true.
They're white progressives.
Yeah.
They're white ideologues of the left.
Well, that's true.
And that's the predominant bunch of them. Now, yeah, if somebody says, well, Liz Cheney's trashing my rights and I don't care what she does, I can see that point of view.
Right, okay. We agree. I just wanted to make sure.
But I don't want some privileged person telling me that we can't have anybody on the democracy team unless they agree with us on climate change policy.
But let's look at, I personally, in terms of hiring writers, I have said I'd be open to hiring someone, I don't care what ideology they come from, but I will not, as a woman owner of a business, I will not have a writer here who doesn't support basic human rights, including abortion rights for women and voting rights. These are just basic rights to me, so I think that's where
I want to meet the person who wants to write here, who doesn't support
there was one. Yes. The far right, he's well known. He wanted to write here, and we got into the discussion about abortion. He said, I'm pro-life. I said, that doesn't work here. You could come and talk about your Republican talking points all day long, and I support the right for everyone to hear what your thinking process is, but I will not support advocacy against basic human rights. So that will be the tip here to end our very first podcast after several years of Trump silence from the Politicus USA team. I thank you so much for tuning in to us, and we will be doing this every Thursday from now on.
For the Politicus podcast, I'm Jason Easley.
And this is Sarah Jones.
Say thank you for listening,
and this is Bo in the background eating the yak cheese.
We'll see you next week.
Yep.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino online.
I was only playing for fun, so winning was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's favorite free online social casino. You too could have the chance to win life-changing cash prizes. Absolutely anybody could be like Mary. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and play for free now. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of the winner.